Now, Africa's largest economy, Nigeria, heads the polls Saturday, February 25, to democratically elect its 16th president. Since 1999, Nigeria has witnessed 24 years of uninterrupted civilian government with a 4-year tenure of presidency as instituted by the fourth constitution of the Republic of Nigeria. This year, we witnessed a transition of power as the President Muhammadu Buhari steps down from the reins of power after a 2-term presidency that began in 2015 under the All Progressives Congress. Unfortunately, these elections did not come without its hitches, from ballot box snatching, election rigging, riots, vote buying, corruption, voters' apathy, to dependency of the electoral umpire. Nigeria struggles to maintain its electoral dignity, with all eyes focusing on Nigeria at the moment. But the question in the hearts of many is, will February 25 change the tide? Will this election signal a new tide in Nigeria's political space? Well, we'll have our guests with us. We have Declan, Galvin, Head of Inside Information and Intelligence at WS Insight, Nairobi, Kenya. And we'll also have joining us later Dr. David Matsanga. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, Declan, I'll begin with you at the moment. And we're seeing lots of focus on Nigeria at the moment. I mean, we've seen the international organizations, we've seen them speak about the elections. We've also seen the AU sending its observation mission. Why is there so much focus on Nigeria's election at the moment compared with other African countries?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation this evening. There's no question that Nigeria is one of the most significant countries in Africa from a geostrategic sense, both from the size of its economy and to the role that it continues to play within broader regional mechanisms, whether that's ECOWAS, whether that's the African Union, and certainly the convening power that Nigerian leaders have around diplomatic issues. So certainly now that we're starting 2023, this is the first election on Africa for the year. There's this big push to be able to participate and encourage the right kinds of practices so that this election remains credible.
All right, Declan, I'm going to begin with this. You talked about Nigeria's leadership roles, and a lot of people have spoken about it. And that's why Nigeria, for a very long time, has been called the giant of Africa. Now, how would you assess Nigeria's roles, especially as it hinges towards elections? What would this election term or mean for Nigeria's leadership roles in Africa?
So, look, this is really, it's hard to overstate the significance of this particular election. Some people say this is the most complex, important election since 1999. But I would hasten to add, we say that every election for Nigeria. So they're all very important. This one in particular is significant because of the acute crises that are happening kind of across the country, not just political, but from a security perspective, certainly economic. There just seems to be a tremendous amount of concern or pessimism. And that is what is animating the attention to this particular election, and why the stakes are so high for it and the ramifications for the entire region.
Thank you so much, Declan. I'd like to bring in Dr. David Matsanga into all of this conversation. And the head of the AU observation mission, Uhuru Kenyatta, he revealed that the eyes of the world and Africa are clearly on Nigeria at the moment. And I'm very sure, Dr. Matsanga, you've been following up with all of Nigeria's elections. And we've had 24 years of uninterrupted civilian governance. Now, how important is the success of Nigeria's election for Africa and the region at the moment?
Thank you very much, Rita, and my colleague in the studio, in wherever he is. First of all, I would like to say Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in the whole Africa. The entire Africa looks at Nigeria as a salvation point. What goes wrong in Nigeria affects the entire sub-Saharan Africa and the entire continent of Africa. Therefore, this election is seen as a springboard for democratization of Africa. This election is seen as one that will determine how future elections, especially in West Africa, where military coups are recurrently coming back and they're going to destroy what we have gained since 1960. So everybody in Africa, East Africa, North Africa, West Africa, South Africa, people look at Nigeria, the biggest economy, one of the economies on African continent with a huge population, and they look at this as being one of the models of Africa. So this election is very, very important for everybody in Africa, especially countries that are looking at all dimensions of democratization in the continent.
Earlier on, I asked Declan the question, especially on Nigeria's leadership roles, being the giant of Africa. And Dr. Matsanga, I'm going to throw that question back to you because you have been a big follower of the African Union. Of course, you also have the ECOWAS, which Nigeria is a part of. How would you assess Nigeria's leadership roles in all these intergovernmental organizations going on? What role has Nigeria played?
Under President Buhari, Nigeria, apart from ECOWAS, Nigeria has played very minimal role on the continent of Africa, in other places of the continent. But in ECOWAS, it has played a pivotal role in making sure that it sustains other countries that are in ECOWAS. But when you look at Nigeria under President General Buhari, things have not been going the way we expected. As you remember, in the first term, he told us he was going to bring down Boko Haram. People are very concerned, the whole continent, people are very, very concerned about the Boko Haram issue. The kidnap, the killings, the abductions, everybody is concerned. So the AU itself has not been very comfortable. Nigeria should have been the leading force in combating terrorism in the Sahel region. This one, my General Buhari is leaving this space with whoever will take over from General Buhari must have enough experience to tackle the problems of terrorism, the problems of economy, the problems of ethnicity, which we see tearing apart most of the African countries, especially a country like Nigeria with several ethnic groups. So we are here. And the African Union has been looking at center points, the West Nigeria, the South Africa, East Kenya, and North Egypt. These are the main key players of African continent. But in the West, military coups near Nigeria have occurred. You have about 3 members of your ECOWAS suspended from African Union. That has not worked well for Nigeria at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to bring Declan now into this conversation. And looking at the past years, I mean, in 2021, 2022, we saw a lot of military coups going on. But Nigeria so far has had 24 years of uninterrupted civilian governance. I mean, looking at Nigeria and all the countries, I mean, what exactly stands them apart to have this 24 years of uninterrupted civilian governance, especially what we're having in other regions, and especially in West Africa?
Sure. So one of the key reasons why Nigeria has managed to kind of avoid this plight of coups that our colleague has rightfully outlined is and also the coups that Nigeria experienced, through the 70s and 80s, is because there has been a better differentiation between military and the political apparatus, whether that's the presidency or the National Assembly. That division is really significant. If we look at areas where we've been having coups d'etats, they are typically countries which are going to be smaller in population. The militaries are configured in a way which allows for typically in these days kind of a mid-rank officer to be able to use his forces, relatively small, to remove the political authorities. So Nigeria is able to avoid that because of structural reasons. However, I think it's important to highlight that there are significant security and separatist issues across the country, whether that's in the south or the northeast. There's a lot of agitation in the southeast as well, which is of course not on par with what we see with Biafra. But nonetheless, there's a lot of forces that are pulling away, and I think that there are more questions today whether the center will hold than what we've seen in the past 24 years.
Dr. Matsanga, while we're looking at Nigeria's democracy and elections, I mean, in 2015, if we go back in time, we saw this smooth transition of power in Nigeria when the former President Goodluck Jonathan handed over to incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari. We just spoke about why so far so good. 24 years, Nigeria has had uninterrupted civilian governance in the country. Now, what precedents has it set up for other African countries to make sure that there's a smooth transition of power from one president to another?
I just want to give a credit where it is due. Despite all these difficulties, the people of Nigeria have handed over, behaved very peacefully. There are, of course, a number of difficulties, especially in the southeast, as my friend has said. The question of ethnicity, the question of a referendum, the question of so many things, agitation for referendum. People have wanted to make things the way the democracy is, which is allowed in a democratic society. But from the transition, from the time that they handed over to a civilian rule, we have been very happy, very watching each step they have been taking from Obasanjo, when Obasanjo took over and they handed over to other people, and then it went on until here we are. We have a good smooth transition, and we expect another good smooth transition from this. But what do we learn from this as Africans? There are some African countries on the continent of Africa that have political prisoners, where we still have political prisoners in their jails, which must not be part of democracy. You can't have a political prisoner and your jail. Jails are made for criminals. Jails are not made for people who express their willingness, their conscience to say, this is what we want for a better place. So some of these countries take example from Nigeria. And believe me or not, we have been very able to notice several changes, people copying what Nigeria has gone through. If that is the case, we have learned quite a lot of things from this transition, smooth transition, giving power to without any military coup coming in. But the behavior which is now coming back as a result of insurgents, you can see almost every West African state, there is insurgents. The Sahel region is full of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram. All these factors can bring in new dispensation that can create chaos for our Africa. But on a whole, this has been a very good lesson for the most of the people of Africa. And I believe a person who is going to take over from General Buhari has got an enormous task, a big uphill task to one, sort out the security issues. What is killing in Nigeria today is security issues, economic issues. We need a country which is powering, working, without some parts of the country being cut off from the center because of terrorism. That one, whoever takes over on Sunday after Sunday, when you Nigerians have decided, must tackle those problems. And those are the problems that are killing most of the West African states. That's why you see Burkina Faso, you see Mali, you see Conakry, younger men coming from the barracks, coming up and saying, no, we have a problem here. It's not being solved. So that is what must happen, and we are happy that this smooth transition will take place. Another point that I'm more concerned about before I land the mic is the question of voter apathy. Last year, 4 years ago, I witnessed Nigerian elections myself as an observer, independently. I came there. Out of 86 million voters, only 28 million turned up to vote. The rest, 58 disappeared, or 56. disappeared somewhere. You can't know where they went. We have now 93.4 million voters. Believe me or not, I think if my prediction from the pattern that I've seen, my own calculation, because I'm a very good opinion pollster here, down here. I do my opinion, I teach opinion polls, and in London and places I'm called to talk about opinion polls. Looking at this election, there could be a voter apathy, which might actually affect some of the places and deliveries of the services. Some people might not be able to vote. There is the cash crunch. There is insecurity. There is no power. These are some of the things that we should look out when going to vote and when coming out for the results.
Okay, I'm going to bring the issue of voter apathy to Declan right now. I'm sure you've been seeing lots of campaigns going on in Nigeria, rallies also. We just had one from the party candidate of the All Progressives Congress, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. We saw a lot of people come out there. Do you think that there will still be voter apathy in this present Nigeria's election, especially with the political awakening we're seeing on social media so far? What's your assessment?
Yeah, I think to be sure, there's going to be significantly lower turnout than the number of either registered voters or people who are eligible to vote. But I'm always quick to highlight that yes, voter apathy is a problem. It's a democratic reality for a lot of countries, but that does not necessarily indicate political disengagement. And what's really important for observers and both for the election as well as analysts is to really look at the kind of feelings and enthusiasm that people have for a political process or political outcome, and voting is one part of that. Not every Nigerian is going to be able to vote because of family or economic or other kinds of realities that they're saddled with. And so we must look at this issue of apathy more holistically than just the one indicator of voting turnout.
I'm going to stay with you, Declan, for just a minute, because Dr. Matsanga mentioned the issue of political prisoners going on in other African countries. And when I talked about the 24 years uninterrupted civilian governance, it was more like a kudos to Nigeria. Now, presently, instead of a two-horse race, we're witnessing a third-horse race, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The APC, the PDP, and the Labour Party. Looking at all the elections in Africa, I mean, do you see Nigeria widening the gap so that it's not just two major political parties, but we're seeing more political parties being involved in elections?
Multipartyism.
All right, Dr. Matsanga, just hold on a bit. I want Declan to answer first, and I'll go over to you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. So look, I think that certainly that there's three people that the public and analysts are talking about is definitely significant and something that is welcome. I would like to shift the conversation more toward other ways in which Nigeria is paving the way for democratic practices or the conduct of elections than just three people. Certainly, it's great that it's not just 1 versus 2 or A versus B, but let's look at just the scale of Nigeria's election and the massive administrative undertaking that it takes, and that Nigerians to a large extent want to participate in. That is very inspirational. The challenges that INEC has, for whatever flaws the commission may have, being able to surmount and continue and to persist cycle after cycle, those things are really, really significant. And I would like, I think that observers and analysts need to take those things into consideration for why Nigeria is really a pace setter in terms of the conduct of elections.
Okay, Dr. Matsanga, the floor is over to you now. Looking at multi-party system, I mean, moving over from just 2 parties to 3 parties, and also having more political parties being involved in elections. Dr. Matsanga, kindly unmute your device, please, so that we can hear you.
I don't know. Are you not hearing me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Multipartyism is the answer to all the difficulties of democracy. The more people engage themselves into more parties, in participating in their delegates conferences, their meetings, resolutions making within the party, democratization of internal democracy within the parties, the three horses, the three people, the third force which has emerged. I think I don't know whether your television allows people to say their opinion. The APC, PDP, and the Labour Party. One of the things that annoyed me as an African and a Pan-African, and I always say my mind, most of these people came to London, to Chatham House, where I'm a very senior member of the Chatham House for many years, over 30 years. And they came to tell the London people, why do you seek legitimacy? Why do African people come to seek legitimacy from the West? We have 65 years of independence. We must handle our issues. We must explain our issues to the people of Nigeria. You don't need to come to fly to US to seek legitimacy. That is one of the things that any leader that takes over Nigeria from Sunday or Monday must look at. You don't need to fly to London, to Chatham House to lecture to who? The people that give you the vote are in Nigeria. Tell them what you will do, what you will do about corruption, what you will do about insecurity, what you will do about economic meltdown, what is going on, power. Every country in Africa has developed a power system where every village has got light. People must make sure that in Nigeria there is power. Any leader who is going to take over power in Nigeria must make sure that every village of Nigeria has light. There is light for everybody to see. So among the three people that I see somebody who has got qualifications, enough professional experience, who can run a government, a person who can steer the government on the people of Nigeria. I will not be naming him, but as a political candidate, a lecturer and a man who has studied political science, I can see somebody who can manage the many problems that Nigeria has got right now.
All right, Dr. Matsanga, I'm sure everybody sees someone that they would prefer in this particular election, especially when it comes to concerns for Nigeria, talking about the economy, talking about political power supply, talking about the economic cash crunch going on in the country. We're still looking at Nigeria's election, especially as it's 2 days away. We'll take a breather right now. When we come back, we'll continue the conversations, especially on Nigeria's election and its effect on the African continent and also on the world. Do stay with us on the conversation.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
Thanks for staying with us on the conversation. We're still looking at Nigeria's election, which is barely 2 days away, and the expectations of not just Nigerians, not just Africans, but also the rest of the world. And I still have with me the pleasure of having Dr. David Matsanga. He's an African affairs analyst who joins us from London, United Kingdom. We also have with us Declan Galvin, head of Insight Information and Intelligence at WS Insight, Nairobi, Kenya. And now, so talking about Nigeria's election, we've seen the AU come also, that's an African Union now, saying its observation mission, saying that it will be there to monitor these elections. There's been a lot of criticisms for the African Union, especially for governments in Africa. So what role is the AU playing in coming to Nigeria at this moment? What role will it play for its elections? Declan, please.
So
is it my turn?
The African Union, will be participating both to encourage, the right kinds of democratic practices that it sees, and provide kind of that kind of support I think that the most value that the AU and a lot of these observation missions provide, particularly when you've got high-level individuals, I know Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, will be there, is that in case there are issues or disputes, in case temperatures start increasing, there are those kinds of friendly, nonpartisan faces that can help kind of bring stuff back to home and make and really encourage people to make democratic or pro-social decisions, whatever the context may be. And so that, I think, is really one of the strongest elements of those particular observations.
Okay, thank you so much, Declan. Now, Dr. Matsanga, it's not just the AU who is serving as an observation mission. I mean, we've seen the United Kingdom also talk about the fact that it is ready to take action against those elements planning to subvert democratic processes in Nigeria. So it's not just the AU. We've seen international communities. We've seen the European Union. We've seen United Kingdom now saying that those who want to truncate Nigeria's democracy will have to face lots of things there. So what role does international community play? And do you see any need for international community to also be with searchlight on Nigeria's election at the moment?
First of all, one of the mistakes that Africa has made is to call in these people to observe their elections. We don't observe elections in America. We don't observe elections in the United Kingdom. I've been voting for 38 years. In the United Kingdom, I've never seen any observer coming from Nigeria at a polling station to supervise elections in a polling station in London. Why do you accept these observers? Why we accept this? This is where we go wrong. This is where conflicts begin coming from. Because we go and borrow their money to run our elections. A country like Nigeria must run its own elections without borrowing money from donors. So when you borrow their money, they will send observers to see how the election went like. Observers have been observing elections in more than 20 countries across the world, including East Timor. I went to East Timor to observe elections in Indonesia, out in the Pacific. But we look at, why do we talk of observers coming from outside? Why don't we have African observers themselves with the local observer team to verify the results? We invite these people, then we later on turn around to say we don't like them, we don't like their reports. Two, on the question of African Union, I'm one of the most disturbed man for the African Union, and I want to thank President Kenyatta, the former president of Kenya, who is there to observe. I respect him so much. He's a man who speaks the truth, and they will speak the truth because we have taught him how to speak the truth. If the elections are being tampered with, he will say it. But the rest of this African Union has got a problem, especially the last election of DRC Congo. When people have observed the elections and we have spent money on it, you don't need again to write 2 reports. Write 1 report. If the election was bad, you call it bad. Not to write one. Write a letter to say, don't recognize the elections. But I think the choice of the chair of observer team in the name of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta of Kenya, the former president of Kenya, is a good choice that he will say what has happened, what has taken place. Again, when you look at the Commonwealth has sent in a veteran, a friend of mine, Thabo Mbeki. We have done quite a lot of things in Darfur. We have brought peace on this continent of Africa together. We have moved from place to place. Thabo Mbeki is also a straightforward person. Those are people, credible African people who can observe elections. I don't see why we should be calling European Union to come here and observe election and give us directives that we shall do this, we shall do this. We pass the age of being controlled from these capital cities. We got our independence, and time has come for us to assert our independence and have our elections conducted, supervised, managed by the African people.
Okay. Now, Declan, still on this interest of the observation missions, Dr. Matsanga is looking at it the way that Africans should be able to observe their own elections. Do you think there are other interests of the international community observing this election, especially in Nigeria? And has any of the observation mission had any impact on the election? So we see observation missions coming to Africa for the elections, and they say, okay, we're going to go against those who will truncate democracy. Has this threat, has this words actually had any impact on the elections, or are they just personal interests for specific African countries?
So the purpose of these observation missions is to observe the process and the conduct of the election. There has been, as Dr. Matsanga has inferred, there's been enormous problems with these types of missions. Today we call them observation missions. Prior we called them monitoring missions, and so there's been this change in identity on what this is and what their purposes are. As they stand today, these are people who are invited to observe the process. One of the critiques that I think we should levy against them is they have a very small visibility in terms of the whole process, particularly a country like Nigeria, which is massive. And so we have to ask and interrogate holistically how credible their findings are. There has been one of the most embarrassing instances was the Carter Center in the 2017 Kenyan elections basically signed off on the credibility of that election, only to have days later the Supreme Court overturn it due to irregularities. And so I think Dr. Matsanga's criticism is well received. But I think there are two other things to point out. As I said, these observation missions are invited. They are supported at high levels of governments. The second is there are genuine observation missions from Africa that goes to countries like the United States and the UK. So you know, and I've spoken to people who've observed the American election and you know, their particular feedback, you know, as one example. So it does happen. We may not see them, but I would put to anybody that the majority of voters, whether they're in Kenya or Nigeria or the United States or the UK, the majority of voters would not actually see a poll observer, just given how few poll observers there typically are.
Declan, I'm going to stay with you because as the world advances, we're looking at more technological advancement, especially when it comes to elections, so that we can have free and fair elections on the African continent, and we do not have a situation where people dispute the elections. Now, so far for Nigeria's election, we're seeing a new update, which has also happened in other states before this general election, which is the bimodal voter accreditation system. Now, when you look at it with all the technological advancement, what are your expectations for this particular election in Nigeria, especially for the African continent, when we're looking at technological advancement for elections and also electronic transmission of results? How does Nigeria advance from the rest? How does the African continent make do, or rather meet up with the technological advancements going on?
So the first thing to point out is this kind of technology that we're talking about in Nigeria, and then obviously when I was covering the Kenyan election and speaking with you in Kenya, this is in many cases leapfrogging kind of election and voting practices in, let's just say, the United States, for example, where there's still a lot of manual voting going on. And so these are areas similar to a question you asked earlier, where Nigeria is very much a pace setter and a trend setter for the continent in its use of technology. So I don't have a crystal ball where I can see whether there's going to be systematic electronic failure, whether it's going to be able to curtail the kind of malpractice and rigging that we're concerned about. But the use of this, the streamlining of this is going to be an incredible learning moment for people who are going to be conducting elections and election commissions, and to kind of go back to the question earlier, observation groups. So to see how this technology is actually being applied, to see what the failures are, to see how they're advancing democratic practices or not, these are all really important discussions, and we will see how that is. But of course, we hope that it will make for a more transparent and credible poll for Nigeria.
Dr. Matsanga, when we're talking about the Kenya elections, I mean, we had electronic transmission of results. Unfortunately, we still had disputes for the elections. For Nigeria at the moment, we're seeing lots of technology being applied for the election. Do you foresee such situation happening again also? Or are we past the stage in Africa or in Nigeria where we can actually trust electronic appliances for elections?
Rita, it might be a miracle, or we might call Angel Gabriel for us to have these electronic gadgets delivering us 100% or even 80%. First of all, look at Nigeria, a massive land. Most of the parts have no power. You can be in Lagos and you want to call somebody in Lagos, the network is not going through. And you call, you don't receive. The person is next door. So we have those problems. We still have those problems of the this digital type of elections. I think what we should do to improve our electoral system, because technology has come and the things are there for us to use. We should, first of all, put power in almost every area of every part of our countries. We should put, the air waves. We don't have some telecommunication is not anywhere available. You will be using satellite phones. At times you need to charge the satellite phone. Some of the polling stations will open too late. There will be no power. The generators will not be working. The fuel is not there for people to buy. Even the diesel. These are some of the problems that are going to come in this type of elections. And I want to come to this point so that my colleague can also touch it. Elections in Africa have become the center point, the trigger to conflicts. And therefore, we must be very careful as Africans, either to choose a manual type of voting or digital voting. Because these two combined as hybrid, we have a problem here.
Okay.
It means, look at India. India votes for 3 months. They have almost 1.8 billion people. But they vote. You have never heard of violence of elections because of elections in India. Why don't we stagger elections? Stagger our voting systems. For example, on Saturday, people are going to vote for governors, people are going to vote for senator, people are going to vote for president.
Just presidential and senate, yeah.
Yeah, look at that. And how do you expect a human being to stay in that box?
Okay.
Within 2 minutes, some of the ballot papers are very long.
All right.
For even
All right, Dr. Matsanga, I'd like Declan to have the last floor because we're really out of time. Now, what are your expectations? I mean, Nigeria is unfortunately not immune to lots of ballot box rigging. When we talk about technology, unfortunately, we're still seeing things happening. We're seeing people snatching ballot boxes. We're seeing vote buying still happening. What are your expectations for Nigeria as they go to the polls on Saturday?
So, First thing to point out, right, is the overwhelming majority of Nigerians who go out to cast their vote are going to do so peacefully. They're going to do so orderly, and the kind of malpractice and abuse and violence that I think everybody's kind of waiting for is going to occur, but it's going to be a very slim minority of people who do that, and that's always a very important point to drive home. That the majority of Nigerians want their brothers and their sisters and their brethren to go and cast their vote and then to continue on with their lives. So even though we're concerned about violence, even though violence is plaguing the whole country right now through various mediums, that is ultimately the expectation that I think we need to recognize. And then we will see how close certain races are in certain areas, and we will then see how politicians choose to react, whether they choose to whip up supporters, whether they choose to call for calm and process. So we will see come Sunday and Monday.
on Saturday and Sunday. Thank you so much, Declan, for joining us, Declan Galvin, and also Dr. David Matsanga. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation as we look forward to Nigeria's election, presidential election on Saturday. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.